we're back at it. Today I'm going to be refreshing the bottom end of Helgam, my E36 Euro M3. So as part of my refresh of my Euro-spec M3, I decided to do the bottom end as well. I don't think it necessarily needs it. I won't know until I open it. For the cost, it would just make sense. I'm planning to track the car, and it has about 120,000 kilometers, which is 50-some-odd thousand miles, 60,000 miles. So it's got some miles on it. So I did a bunch of research, and I looked around at the options. And what I ended up doing is I ended up talking to Ben at Hack Engineering, who has a lot of experience with these Euro motors. He knows what works. So in talking with him, and thanks Ben, thanks for putting up with all my questions, he recommended King race bearings, for the rod bearings I should say, and ARP rod bolts. And with part of the ARP rod bolts is not to torque them, but to use a stretch gauge. And this is going to cause a lot of controversy. This is the whole internet is split in two, whether or not you use ARP rod bolts or don't use ARP rod bolts. And it really comes down to whether or not the OEs have proper clamping, proper strength, and whether the ARPs over torque. Talking to Ben, he did a lot of testing, and he tried multiple different OE rod bolts and multiple ARPs. He torqued them to spec, he stretch gauged them to spec, and he used a bore gauge and measured it out. And what he came up with is that the ARPs were way more consistent. OE road bolt that you have to torque to spec, you can't stretch to spec. They were all over the place in terms of the clamping force. ARPs were incredibly consistent. So from that perspective alone, the fact you get consistent clamping across all your rods, that means you get consistent oil gap across all the rods, and the fact of the matter is on all the cars he builds, he uses ARPs, and he's never seen any weird wear. So with that in mind, it made sense to me to follow his advice and see what happens. So next steps, we're going to rotate this over, and we're going to change out the rod bearings and rod bolts. Got the motor rotated. I'm going to now, one at a time, zip off the rod bolts, pull the bearings, inspect them, and see if there's any issues. If there is, well then I'll have to go to plan B. If not, then I'm going to clean things up, reinstall the new rod bearings, and stretch gauge down the rod bolts. So I have just replaced all the rod bearings. I temporarily installed the ARP so I could rotate it through. And I've pulled and cleaned a bunch of the bearings themselves, the OE ones. And they're pretty good, considering this is a 120,000 kilometer car. The bearings look quite nice. This is the bottom bearing, and it looks really good, barely any wear on the coating. This is the top, which gets the most wear, and this is the worst of all the 6, and it's showing a little bit of wear through the first layer of coating, and it's pushing through the second layer of coating. So it's good I changed them, but overall I'd say the condition of the bearings is really nice. And again, putting the high quality ones in from King will just extend the life. Alright, so we're getting ready to stretch these rod bolts. There's a full-on session of this. I'll point up here to the link from the E36 build. So we're going to basically go through the whole process of stretching these. It's really important. Rod bolts, you don't want to just torque for the most part. Stretching is the most accurate way. So we've set up the stretch gauge. We can see the 2 little ticks there. That's the range we want to stretch the bolt to. From ARP's website for this particular bolt, we want to be between the 0065 and 0070.
So that's where we're set up. You can see with the dial gauge, what you do is when you put it on, you just drop it onto the ARP bolt, and then you dial in your 0, just like that. And now Moose is going to start pulling, and I'm going to watch to make sure that we get there. So you can see we're slowly getting there. Keep going, Moose. All right, you're at 5. Yep, keep going. There's 6, 65. 5, just a little bit more. Okay, we are in place again. We're zeroed. Moose, go ahead. Okay. Going. Close. Yep.
All right, that's done. New rod bearings, rod bolts torqued to spec or stretched to spec. So next up, I'm going to install the oil pump, pan, gasket, and actually probably do the rear main seal as part of that because everything gets sealed together. And that's pretty much it. This motor has been essentially refreshed. Back at the shop again, here at the Speed Academy, doing the reassembly. Backing at the Speed Academy shop, continuing the process of the reassembly of my Euro S50.